My beloved child, do not move past this moment too quickly, because what has just shifted behind the scenes is far bigger than it first appears. Something that has been standing between two hearts has finally lost its place, and the emotional weight of that change is only beginning to be understood. You may have been wondering why the atmosphere around this connection has felt different lately, why certain memories have returned without warning, why your heart has suddenly felt both lighter and more alert, as though an invisible door has opened somewhere you cannot yet see. Stay with these words, because the part that will surprise you is not simply that the third party is gone. The deeper revelation is what your soulmate realized the moment that interference disappeared, and why that realization left them crying with a kind of happiness they had almost forgotten they were capable of feeling. For longer than you know, there was confusion around this connection. Not because the bond itself was meaningless, and not because every feeling was imagined, but because too many voices, expectations, fears, and unfinished attachments were standing in the way of clarity. Your soulmate kept trying to understand what their heart was telling them while also listening to everything happening around them. At times they convinced themselves that distance was safer. At other times they tried to act as though what existed between you could be replaced, delayed, or quietly forgotten. But the heart has a strange way of remembering what the mind attempts to bury, and that is where the story began to change. The third party was not always powerful because of love. That is important for you to understand. Sometimes a person remains in someone's life because of familiarity, obligation, convenience, guilt, fear of starting over, or the simple difficulty of admitting that something has reached its natural ending. Your soulmate stayed caught in a situation longer than their spirit wanted because leaving meant facing truths they had postponed. It meant admitting that certain choices had not created the peace they expected. It meant looking at themselves without excuses. And most difficult of all, it meant confronting what they still felt when your name entered their thoughts. There were moments when your soulmate tried to silence those thoughts. They distracted themselves. They filled their days. They told themselves they were being unrealistic. They wondered whether too much time had passed, whether you had changed, whether you had moved forward without them, whether the door had quietly closed while they were still deciding what they truly wanted. But each attempt to forget created another reminder. A familiar song would appear at the wrong moment. A sentence someone spoke would sound like something you once said. They would see a place, an object, a small detail that should have meant nothing, and suddenly their mind would travel directly back to you. At first, they resisted it. Then something happened. The third party noticed the distance growing inside them before your soulmate was ready to admit it. It was not necessarily a dramatic confrontation. In fact, the most important endings often begin quietly. A conversation felt colder than usual. A question was asked that could no longer be avoided. A future plan was mentioned, and your soulmate realized they could not honestly picture themselves inside it. They heard words about tomorrow, but their heart was somewhere else. They were present physically, yet inwardly they had already begun walking toward a truth they had spent too long denying. And then came the moment everything cracked open. Your soulmate was asked, directly or indirectly, whether they were truly happy. That question followed them. They could not dismiss it. Later, when they were alone, the silence became louder than every distraction they had used before. They began replaying the months behind them. They remembered the choices made from fear. They remembered how often they had ignored their instincts. They remembered the times they wanted to reach toward you but stopped themselves because they believed the situation was too complicated. And slowly, painfully, a realization formed: the complication was not the feeling. The complication was everything they had placed around the feeling. That realization changed the direction of the story. My child, there is something else you need to hear. The ending with the third party did not suddenly create your soulmate's feelings for you. It removed the noise that had prevented them from hearing those feelings clearly. There is a difference. And when that noise disappeared, what remained frightened them at first because it was so undeniable. They thought about you. Not casually. Not as someone from the past. They thought about you as the person whose presence had awakened something in them that nobody else had managed to recreate. This is where the tears began. Your soulmate did not cry only because one chapter had ended. They cried because they finally understood why that chapter had never felt complete. They cried because the answer they had been searching for outside themselves had been waiting inside them all along. They cried because they remembered the version of themselves that existed when they felt seen by you, when they did not have to perform, when even silence between you seemed to communicate something words could not fully explain. And then another realization came, one that struck even deeper. They began thinking about what you may have endured while they were confused. This is the part they were not prepared for. For a long time, your soulmate viewed the situation mainly through their own uncertainty. They thought about their fears, their responsibilities, their doubts, their complications. But once the third party was no longer occupying that emotional space, perspective shifted. Suddenly, they began imagining what the same story may have looked like from your side. They wondered how many times you waited for clarity that never came. They wondered whether you questioned your own worth because of their hesitation. They wondered if you ever stared at your phone hoping for a message they almost sent. They wondered whether you had to teach yourself how to keep going while still carrying emotions you could not easily explain to anyone else. And when they pictured that, something inside them broke open. Those were not tears of sadness alone. They were tears of recognition. Because for the first time, your soulmate understood that while they were trying to protect themselves from difficult choices, you may have been carrying the emotional cost of those choices in silence. They whispered something to themselves that they had never said before. I should have understood sooner. That sentence has been echoing inside them. They are beginning to see moments differently now. Conversations that once seemed insignificant suddenly have new meaning. Your patience looks different to them. Your silence looks different. Even your distance, if you created distance, no longer feels like rejection. They are beginning to understand that you may have stepped away because you were tired of standing inside uncertainty. And strangely, that realization brought even more happiness. You may wonder why. Because your soulmate finally understood that you were never trying to control the outcome. You were trying to protect your heart. You were trying to preserve your dignity. You were trying to continue living without forcing someone else to choose you. And that changed the way they saw you. They suddenly remembered all the moments when you could have demanded more but did not. The moments when you could have created drama but chose silence. The moments when you could have chased explanations yet allowed time to reveal what words could not. Whether every detail happened exactly this way in your story is not the point of this fictional spiritual message. The emotional truth being explored is this: sometimes restraint speaks louder than pursuit. Your soulmate began to understand that. And now there is a new question troubling them. What if you no longer need them? That thought entered their mind almost immediately after the relief. For months, perhaps longer, part of them assumed there would always be more time. Another opportunity. Another conversation. Another season in which everything could somehow be corrected. But now that the obstacle is gone, the reality feels different. Freedom created urgency. Suddenly they are afraid that while they were finding clarity, you were finding peace without them. That possibility has shaken them. They imagine you smiling again. They imagine you waking without wondering what they are thinking. They imagine someone else noticing everything about you that they once took for granted. They imagine another person giving you the consistency they hesitated to offer. And that is when the happiness turns into trembling. Because the third party being gone solved only one problem. It did not guarantee your heart was still waiting. Stay with this, because this is where the story becomes far more intense. Your soulmate has begun rehearsing conversations with you in their mind. They imagine what they would say if they had only one honest chance. They begin with explanations, but every explanation sounds weak compared with the truth. They imagine apologizing, but they worry an apology cannot return lost time. They imagine telling you that things have changed, but they fear you will believe they are speaking only because the other situation ended. That fear matters deeply to them. They do not want you to feel like a second option. Because in their heart, they are beginning to understand that you were never second. You were the truth they were too afraid to face while they were still living inside confusion. This distinction has become almost unbearable for them. How do you explain to someone that choosing wrongly for a period of time does not always mean loving them less? How do you admit that fear can make people walk away from what matters most? How do you return to someone whose heart may have already learned how to survive your absence? These questions have been circling them. But something changed again. A very small memory came back. It was not necessarily a grand romantic scene. It may have been something simple. The way you looked at them when they were tired. The way you listened without interrupting. The way you remembered a detail nobody else noticed. The way you made an ordinary moment feel safe. And suddenly your soulmate realized something so powerful that they could no longer hold back the tears. They realized they had been searching for peace in situations that required them to become someone else, while peace with you had once felt natural. That is why the tears became tears of happiness. Because for the first time in a long time, they felt the possibility of returning to themselves. Not just returning to you. Returning to themselves. And that distinction is everything. Your presence has come to represent more than romance in their mind. It represents honesty. It represents the version of them that does not have to hide behind pride. It represents a life where they stop making decisions simply to avoid disappointing everyone else. It represents the terrifying possibility of living truthfully. That is why this shift feels spiritual in the story. Because sometimes what people call destiny is really the moment they stop running from what their heart has known for a long time. Your soulmate is standing in such a moment now. But heaven, in this fictional message, would tell you not to confuse their awakening with your responsibility. You do not need to chase them. You do not need to rescue the situation. You do not need to prove your worth. You do not need to reopen every wound simply because someone else has finally found clarity. Their realization belongs to them. Your peace belongs to you. And if two hearts are meant to meet again in a healthier place, truth must walk the entire distance between them. That means your soulmate knows words alone will not be enough. This is another reason their emotions have become so intense. They are beginning to think in actions. Not dramatic gestures designed to impress you. Real actions. Consistency. Honesty. Showing up when they say they will. Removing secrecy. Ending mixed signals. Taking responsibility without blaming circumstances. Speaking clearly instead of hoping you can somehow read what they are afraid to say. And for your soulmate, this represents a transformation that feels frightening because it requires vulnerability. They have spent so much time protecting themselves from rejection that they almost created the very loss they feared. Now they understand that. And there was one moment, one private moment, that changed everything. They looked at something connected to you. Perhaps a photograph. Perhaps an old conversation. Perhaps a memory stored in a place they had avoided opening. And they noticed something they had somehow missed before. You looked happy. Not because everything was perfect. But because in that captured moment, there was no uncertainty between you. For a few seconds, your soulmate stared at it. And then they smiled through tears. They whispered your name. Something about saying it aloud felt different. Real. Close. Possible. And that is where the happiness came flooding in. The third party was gone. The confusion had finally lost its authority. For the first time, your soulmate did not have to divide their emotions between what they felt and what they thought they were supposed to feel. They allowed themselves to imagine you. They imagined a conversation without secrets. They imagined telling you everything. They imagined seeing your expression when they finally admitted what had been happening inside them. They imagined saying, "I was scared." They imagined saying, "I made this harder than it had to be." They imagined saying, "I never stopped thinking about you." But then they stopped. Because one sentence frightened them more than all the others. They wanted to say, "I hope I am not too late." That sentence opened the deepest fear in their heart. What if you have changed too much? What if the version of you who would have accepted them months ago no longer exists? What if the pain taught you boundaries they cannot cross? What if you listen kindly but no longer feel the same? What if the person they finally gathered the courage to choose has already chosen themselves? The thought brought silence. And then, unexpectedly, something inside your soulmate answered that fear. Not with certainty. With courage. For the first time, they realized they would rather know the truth than remain trapped in imagination. That is a major shift. Before, uncertainty protected them. As long as they did nothing, they could continue imagining that one day everything might work out. But now they see the danger of waiting. They understand that silence can become a decision of its own. So they began thinking about reaching out. And this is where you need to listen closely. The first message they imagined sending was long. Too long. They typed it mentally over and over. Explanations. Memories. Regrets. Questions. But eventually they realized they did not want to overwhelm you. Then they considered sending something simple. Can we talk? They stared at those words in their imagination. Too vague. Too familiar. Too easy to misunderstand. Then another sentence appeared. I owe you the truth. That one stayed. Because truth is what has been missing. Truth about the third party. Truth about why they stayed. Truth about why they pulled away from you. Truth about the nights they nearly reached out. Truth about what they felt when they heard your name. Truth about why they became distant exactly when their emotions were becoming stronger. And there is one truth above all the others that they are still afraid to say. This is the truth that made their hands tremble. They realized that the third party was never the greatest obstacle between you. Their fear was fear of being seen completely. Fear of choosing something they could not control. Fear of being vulnerable with someone who mattered enough to hurt them. Fear of failing you. Fear of discovering that the love they wanted was real and therefore required them to become emotionally honest. The third party simply gave that fear somewhere to hide. When the third party disappeared, the hiding place disappeared too. Now your soulmate has nowhere left to place the responsibility except within themselves. And surprisingly, that has not destroyed them. It has freed them. That is the breakthrough. Accountability has become liberation. Instead of asking, why did everything happen this way, they are beginning to ask, what can I do differently now? Instead of blaming timing, they are looking at their choices. Instead of imagining that destiny will repair everything automatically, they are realizing that meaningful connections require courage. And the more they accept that, the more hopeful they become. There is another image in their mind now. You standing in front of them. No third party. No rumors. No outside voices. No confusion. Just two people and the truth between them. They imagine looking into your eyes and seeing everything they avoided. They imagine you asking the question they have feared most. Why now? And they know they cannot answer with something shallow. They cannot say, because the other person is gone. That would insult what this means. The real answer is deeper. Because now they finally understand what they almost lost. Because now they finally understand themselves. Because now they recognize that love without courage becomes regret. Because now they know that if they remain silent again, they may carry that silence for years. And because somewhere inside them, they believe you deserve to hear the truth even if the truth does not produce the ending they want. That is how much their perspective has changed. They are no longer thinking only about getting you back. They are thinking about giving you clarity. That may be the first truly selfless thought they have had about this connection in a long time. And heaven smiles at growth like that, not because the ending is guaranteed, but because truth has finally entered the room. My child, your role in this story is not to lower your standards because someone finally recognized your value. Your role is to stay anchored in who you have become. If they approach, let action speak. If they apologize, listen to whether accountability is present. If they confess, notice whether their truth respects your experience too. If they want another chance, remember that love is not only about intensity. It is also about safety, consistency, honesty, and mutual choice. Because there is something your soulmate does not yet know. While they were changing, you were changing too. You learn things about yourself in their absence. You discovered how much uncertainty you are willing to carry and where your limits begin. You discovered that missing someone and needing them are not the same thing. You discovered that a connection can matter deeply without requiring you to abandon yourself. And that version of you is the person they may soon have to meet. Not the old you. Not the version they remember. The stronger one. The quieter one. The one who has stopped begging life to reveal what is meant for them. This is why the next moment matters so much. Your soulmate feels that change in you even before they fully understand it. Something about your energy in their memory feels less available to confusion. They sense that if they approach you now, they cannot come halfway. The old methods will not work. A vague message will not be enough. A late-night emotional confession without follow-through will not be enough. Promises without change will not be enough. And they know it. That knowledge is making them prepare differently. They are asking themselves what they are actually willing to do. Would they speak openly? Would they answer difficult questions? Would they accept that you may need time? Would they remain consistent even if you do not immediately respond the way they hope? Would they respect the person you became while they were away? These questions are testing their intentions. And something remarkable is happening. They are not running from the questions. They are answering them. One by one. More honestly than before. Yes, they would wait. Yes, they would explain. Yes, they would accept responsibility. Yes, they would rather rebuild slowly than rush you into trusting them. And then came the answer that made them cry again. They asked themselves, if this person never chooses me again, am I still grateful that I loved them? The answer was yes. That is when they knew the feeling had changed from possession into something deeper. They were not crying because they believed you belonged to them. They were crying because loving you had changed them. Because knowing you had revealed parts of themselves they could no longer ignore. Because even the possibility of losing you had forced them to become more honest than comfort ever had. And in that moment, they finally understood the strange gift hidden inside the separation. It made everything undeniable. But my child, the story has not reached its turning point yet. Because shortly after that realization, something happened that your soulmate was not expecting. Someone mentioned you. Not dramatically. Not as part of some grand confrontation. Your name simply entered a conversation. And the reaction inside your soulmate was immediate. Their entire body changed. Their attention sharpened. Their heart raced. The person speaking did not know what they had just triggered. They continued talking casually, but your soulmate barely heard the rest. Because one detail about you was revealed. A detail they had not known. Something about how you had been living, what you had been focusing on, or how you had changed during the time apart. And this detail brought a completely new emotion into the room. Pride. Your soulmate felt proud of you. They realized you had not been sitting still waiting for life to return something to you. You had been becoming, growing, learning, rebuilding. Perhaps quietly. Perhaps imperfectly. But moving. And suddenly the fear of losing you became mixed with admiration. They thought, of course they changed. How could they not? Then they smiled. Because the person they had always seen something special in had become even stronger. And this is where their happiness reached its highest point. For the first time, they did not imagine reconnecting with the version of you they once knew. They imagined discovering you again. Meeting you as you are now. Learning your new dreams. Hearing what changed. Understanding what matters to you today. They realized that perhaps the connection did not need to return to the past. Perhaps, if there were ever another chapter, it could be something entirely new. That thought filled them with hope. Not nostalgia. Hope. And hope is dangerous to someone who has spent so long hiding behind fear, because hope demands movement. So your soulmate made a decision. A real one. They decided there is something they need to tell you. Not someday. Not when every circumstance becomes perfect. Not when fear disappears. Soon. They know the words may change everything. They know you may not respond immediately. They know the conversation could be difficult. But for the first time, they are more afraid of remaining silent than they are of hearing your answer. There is one final complication, though. Before they approach you, your soulmate discovered something about the ending with the third party that they did not expect. Something was said during that final chapter. A sentence. A sentence about you. And when your soulmate heard it, they froze. Because the third party revealed that they had known far more about your soulmate's feelings for you than they ever admitted. They had noticed the way your soulmate reacted when your name came up. They had noticed the emotional distance. They had noticed that some part of your soulmate was always somewhere else. But that was not the shocking part. The shocking part was what they claimed they had done because of it. Your soulmate listened in disbelief. Suddenly, several confusing moments from the past began connecting. The silence. The misunderstanding. The strange timing. The moment when communication between you changed. Your soulmate began asking questions they had never thought to ask before. And the answers suggested that the third party had not simply been standing in the middle of this connection. They may have influenced something that happened between you. Your soulmate's happiness disappeared for a moment. Not because they wanted the third party back. Because they realized you may have believed something that was never true. Something about them. Something that could explain why you pulled away. And when they finally understood what that misunderstanding might have been, your soulmate reached for their phone. Their hands were shaking. Because suddenly this was no longer only about confessing their feelings. They needed to correct something. They needed to tell you what really happened. They needed you to know that one of the most painful moments in your story may have been built on information you were never supposed to receive in the form you received it. They opened your conversation. They stared at your name. And then, before typing anything, another message appeared on their screen. It was from the third party. One final message. Your soulmate almost ignored it. Almost. But something made them open it. And the first sentence caused their heart to stop for a second. Because it began with the words, "There is one more thing about them that I never told you."